Lyra moved through the corridors of the outpost with the precision of a seasoned technician, her long ears swaying slightly as she bent over a flickering console. Each panel and wire was familiar, every hum of the energy conduits a note in the symphony of her routines. The silence of the station was a comfort, punctuated only by the occasional chirp of native wildlife echoing from the observation decks. She had perfected every motion, every check, every maintenance cycle. Nothing ever surprised her here, and that was how she liked it, until the sudden klaxon shattered her tranquility, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots, human boots echoing down the metallic hallway. Lyra froze, her ears twitching. Visitors were rare, and she had never expected a human to appear, especially not here. A metallic clang echoed from the maintenance bay, followed by a voice that somehow sounded both commanding and bewildered. Anyone home? Hello. I think I might have accidentally locked myself out of the airlock." Her first instinct was to ignore it. Humans were notoriously clumsy, and she had no desire to intervene. But curiosity, or perhaps the faintest trace of amusement, compelled her to follow the sound. There he was, a soldier in a uniform that seemed designed more for theatrics than practicality, his helmet slightly askew, holding a gadget that sputtered and sparked in protest. He was struggling with the airlock console, pressing buttons in a sequence that made her long ears ache. "Do you need assistance?" she asked, her voice precise, measured. The soldier jumped as if she had materialized from thin air. "Oh. Yes, please. I'm Captain Dorian Vex, and I may have slightly misunderstood the airlock protocol. Nothing catastrophic, just a tiny, very temporary breach risk." He gave a sheepish grin which looked ridiculous under the blinking lights of the corridor. Lyra tilted her head, one hand on the panel. "Slightly misunderstood. Of course. Step aside." With a swift series of motions, she corrected his input, resetting the airlock and preventing a probable explosion. He blinked, staring at her long ears and the careful precision of her movements. "Wow, that was amazing. Seriously. You're like a wizard of buttons." She raised an eyebrow. "I am a technician, this is my duty." "But you do it with style," he said, shrugging. "I once tried to fix a fuel injector on a shuttle and ended up launching a spare toolbox into orbit. Not even kidding. It's probably floating around somewhere, being a very expensive satellite now." Lyra suppressed a snort, which turned into a small chuckle. She had not expected humor, least of all in this particular encounter. "You humans are unpredictable," she said, shaking her head. "Unpredictable is my middle name. Well, not legally, but you get the idea." He winked. Over the next few hours, she found herself guiding him through the outpost, explaining the routines of life support, energy cores, and the occasional temperamental security drone. Dorian attempted to follow her instructions, but he had a remarkable talent for misunderstanding even the simplest procedures. At one point, he tried to polish a hovering drone by gently patting it, which resulted in the machine spinning wildly and knocking him into a stack of energy cells. Lyra caught him just in time, though she could not stop herself from laughing. His face was streaked with dust, one helmet strap dangling absurdly, and he grinned up at her, utterly unbothered. "You laugh at my failures," he said, "but admit it was pretty funny. That was top-tier slapstick, should win awards." "You are reckless," she said, still smiling, "and entirely lacking in spatial awareness." "And yet," he replied, "here I am alive. Maybe your humor is my secret weapon." She considered him carefully. There was something about his presence that made her heart race slightly, not with fear, but with intrigue. A single human who did not belong here had managed to inject chaos into her ordered existence without breaking it entirely. Perhaps, she thought, there was more to him than clumsiness. The next day brought further surprises. Dorian insisted on exploring the surrounding landscape, arguing that the flora and fauna of this planet were too cool to just admire from the window. Lyra tried to warn him about the local wildlife. Luminous, semi-transparent creatures that floated on thermal currents, some curious, some aggressive when provoked. She had spent years avoiding them, observing from safe distances. Dorian, however, had a different approach. He tripped over a moss-covered rock, stumbled into a swarm of glowing insect-like creatures, and emerged covered in neon dust, arms flailing. "They're beautiful," he shouted through the dust, laughing. "Also slightly terrifying and sticky, but mostly beautiful." Lyra's ears twitched, half in exasperation, half in amusement. "You are impossible. And you secretly love it," he said, smirking. Their misadventures continued as they repaired malfunctioning satellite dishes, negotiated with temperamental energy matrices, and narrowly escaped a territorial predator that resembled a cross between a mantis and a jellyfish. Every encounter tested their patience, skill, and resilience, but also revealed their strengths to each other. Dorian's improvisation complemented Lyra's precision, his humor softened her rigidity, and her calm efficiency grounded his impulsiveness. That evening, after a particularly tense repair session, they sat on the observation deck. The twin moons hung low, casting silver light over the alien landscape. Dorian kicked his boots up onto the railing, smearing neon moss onto the floor. "You know," he said, "for someone who likes solitude, you're a lot of fun." Lyra tilted her head. "Fun is not a concept I pursue. Efficiency and order are far more practical." "Practical is boring. Fun is surprisingly effective for morale," he countered, grinning. "Also, it makes things like near-death encounters more enjoyable. I call it the smile or scream strategy." She allowed herself a small laugh. The sound was foreign to her own ears, yet comforting. She realized that, for the first time in years, her routines felt incomplete without the unpredictable presence of another being. Her long ears twitched at the faint chuckle escaping her throat, and for a moment, the outpost no longer felt like an empty machine but a living place where something unexpected, and perhaps delightful, was beginning to grow. The days that followed cemented their peculiar partnership. Dorian's attempts to learn alien technology led to disastrous but oddly effective improvisations. Lyra found herself anticipating his comments, smiling before he even made the joke. They discovered humor in danger, amusement in failure, and a strange camaraderie that defied all rules of protocol. By the time the first week drew to a close, Lyra could no longer imagine returning to the solitude she had once cherished. She had been cautious, precise, and meticulously controlled, and yet one human soldier with his wit, bravery, and unapologetic clumsiness had upended all of it. She leaned against the console, watching him fiddle with a misaligned satellite dish, muttering to himself in a string of incomprehensible human words. Her ears twitched, her lips curved in a reluctant smile, and for the first time, Lyra considered that perhaps life could be far more interesting with chaos, deliberate, unintentional, and occasionally hilarious, mixed in. Somewhere deep inside, a small spark flickered, a whisper of curiosity about what adventures might lie ahead. The day began with a minor catastrophe, which, by Dorian's reckoning, qualified as heroically chaotic, and by Lyra's as avoidable with minimal human intervention. He had somehow managed to entangle himself in the external energy conduits while attempting to install a new sensor array. And now, he dangled awkwardly from a support beam, feet kicking like a deranged marionette. Lyra approached, her long ears brushing against the cool metal walls, and extended a hand. "You know, some species evolved wings instead of arms for a reason," she said, steadying him. Dorian laughed, a high, slightly nervous sound. "And yet here I am, defying evolution's sensible suggestions. You'd think after my third orbiting toolbox incident, I'd learn humility, but no, adventure calls." Lyra sighed, though the twitch of her ears betrayed amusement. "Adventure or chaos?" "Semantics," he replied, grinning. "But technically, I'm saving this outpost from the perils of boredom. Consider me the morale officer." It was impossible not to be drawn into his energy. Even as she reprimanded him, she found herself enjoying the absurdity of his antics. As she helped him untangle, A flicker in the nearby energy matrix caught her attention. The sensor array they had just installed was malfunctioning, sending out erratic pulses that could, in theory, attract local wildlife with predatory tendencies. "You know," Dorian said, dangling by one hand while tapping the console with the other, "I'm starting to think this place was designed as an obstacle course for humans. Or maybe it's a test. I feel like if I survive, I get a cookie, or a medal, or both." Lyra tapped the console with a finger, rerouting the errant pulses. "If surviving is a medal-worthy accomplishment, then your medal is a glowing neon mosquito circling your head." Dorian swatted ineffectively at the air. "It's decorative, very immersive, like nature-themed confetti." By midday, the pair had managed to restore the sensor array, although not without minor explosions that left Dorian covered in smudges of neon residue. Lyra watched as he licked a streak of glowing moss off his hand, grimacing. "You realize that's mildly toxic, right?" "Details," he said, shrugging, and smiled at her. "Life's too short to worry about minor toxins. Besides, I'm a soldier. My survival skills include licking mysterious alien substances." The first major challenge arrived in the form of a territorial beast the size of a hovercraft, a creature with translucent wings that shimmered like molten glass and tendrils that waved unpredictably. It had wandered near the outpost's energy field, drawn by the residual pulses from their morning's work. Dorian, naturally, wanted to engage it directly. "Stand back," he said, brandishing a device that looked suspiciously like a repurposed fire extinguisher. "I've got this." Lyra frowned. "You're going to provoke it, step back." He winked. "Provoke is a strong word. I prefer introduce myself dramatically." The creature surged toward them, wings flaring. Dorian leapt forward, misjudged the trajectory, and landed in a heap against the energy conduit. Lyra, calculating the creature's flight pattern, activated a containment field that gently nudged it away from the outpost. The creature paused midair, giving a quizzical trill before floating off toward the mountains, leaving the pair to catch their breath. "You know," Dorian said, brushing dust off his uniform, "if this were a theater, that would have been a standing ovation moment." "Bravo, Lyra, bravo." "I don't require applause," she said, though her lips curved in a reluctant smile. By evening, their attention shifted to a more mundane, but no less challenging, task: repairing a power relay that had shorted out after the creature's visit. Dorian, still dusty and sticky from earlier, approached it with cautious optimism. "I read the manual once, sort of. Maybe. I think I got the gist." Lyra rolled her eyes. "Your grasp of technical documentation is creative at best." As they worked, Dorian muttered to himself in an odd rhythm, punctuating each sentence with dramatic gestures. Lyra couldn't help but glance at him, noting how his long fingers moved over the controls with a mixture of precision and improvisation. Despite the chaos, the relay sparked to life under their combined efforts, glowing steadily. Dorian threw his hands up in triumph. "See, who said humans can't handle alien tech?" Lyra adjusted a setting on the interface. "I did," she said, amused, "but you've exceeded expectations." Their camaraderie deepened as night fell. On the observation deck, they shared a meal of native fruits that glowed softly under the twin moons. Dorian attempted to peel one with his teeth, failing spectacularly, while Lyra, ever methodical, sliced hers with precision. "You could use a knife," she suggested. "I like using my teeth. Builds character," he said, and took another bite, smearing juice across his uniform. She shook her head but laughed, the sound light and genuine. "You are impossible." "Impossible is my specialty," he said, raising a half-eaten fruit in a toast. As they finished eating, a sudden alert blared through the outpost. A micrometeor shower was approaching, capable of damaging external panels and communication arrays. Lyra immediately assessed the situation, calculating angles and velocities, while Dorian prepared protective measures, humor still intact despite the threat. "Micrometeors," he said, watching the approaching streaks. "I knew this job would have sparkle, but I didn't expect it to be literal." Lyra allowed herself a small grin. Your commentary is occasionally useful. They worked in tandem, her technical expertise complemented by his quick improvisation. Panels were reinforced, shields engaged, and the meteor shower passed with minimal damage. As the last streak faded, Dorian wiped his forehead dramatically. And they said humans can't multitask. Take that, universe. By the end of the chapter, Lyra realized how much her perspective had shifted. Dorian's clumsy courage, his jokes in the face of danger, his stubborn optimism, it was infectious. Her long ears twitched as she observed him fiddling with a satellite relay, muttering to himself, and she understood that she had begun to look forward to his presence, the chaos he brought, and the laughter that had slowly woven itself into her daily life. For the first time in years, the outpost no longer felt like an isolated machine. It felt alive, messy, unpredictable, and in a way she had not anticipated, warm. Lyra woke to the soft hum of the outpost's core, the twin moons casting long silver beams across the corridors. She had spent countless nights here in solitude, meticulously scanning systems and checking for the smallest anomaly, but tonight was different. The quiet was accompanied by a presence she had grown unaccustomed to. Dorian was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the observation deck, fiddling with a small, blinking device that looked alarmingly like a repurposed interstellar coffee maker. "Good morning," she said, her voice careful, almost hesitant. Her long ears twitched with a subtle energy she had not felt before, anticipation. Dorian looked up, smudges of neon moss still faintly clinging to his uniform. Morning. Or technically afternoon, or whatever the local planet time calls it, but I like morning better, sounds optimistic. He grinned, offering her a half-burnt alien pastry, for morale. She raised an eyebrow, taking it anyway. "You make every day chaotic, yet somehow bearable. And sometimes enjoyable," he added, popping a corner of pastry into his mouth. "I think I've leveled up from disaster magnet to accidental hero." She allowed a small smile. Accidental, yes, hero questionable. Their morning calm was interrupted by a rapid series of alarms. The planetary communications array was experiencing severe interference, cutting off long-range transmissions. It wasn't just a technical glitch. Someone, or something, was actively trying to jam the outpost. Lyra immediately scanned the readings, calculations streaming through her mind as she analyzed the interference. "It's deliberate," she said, her voice firm. "The signal is being masked from a nearby asteroid belt. Whoever did this knew exactly how to target our arrays." Dorian sprang into action, flinging open access panels with the kind of reckless confidence that had become endearingly predictable. "Looks like we're under siege, partner. Shall we dance with danger?" "You mean potentially get fried by our own systems?" Lyra retorted, but her ears twitched with excitement. "Follow my lead. And try not to break anything permanently this time." As they worked together, the pattern of the interference became clear. A rogue faction of scavengers was attempting to claim the outpost's advanced technology for themselves. Dorian, armed with a mixture of technical improvisation and military instinct, handled the immediate threat, while Lyra orchestrated the complex rerouting of power and communications. At one point, he grabbed a stray energy rod and used it to create a temporary shield against a plasma drone, slipping on the slick floor and landing face first in a puddle of coolant. He popped up, dripping and grinning. "I call that the cool under pressure technique." Lyra couldn't help but laugh. "You're infuriatingly inventive." Hours passed in a blur of holographic schematics, flashing alarms, and narrowly avoided explosions. Their synergy had reached a rhythm she had never expected. Dorian's instinctive, chaotic methods now complemented her precise, analytical approach perfectly. Together, they outmaneuvered the scavengers, redirecting energy fields to disable intruding drones and creating temporary interference patterns to mask their own signals. When the last threat had passed and the communications array was fully restored, the outpost hummed with a quiet triumph. Lyra leaned back against a console, her long ears drooping in exhaustion. Dorian collapsed beside her, wiping soot from his face. "Well," he said, grinning, "we survived. Again. I'd like to thank you for the occasional guidance and, of course, the continuous eye-rolling. Very motivational." She shook her head, smiling, but felt a warmth that went beyond amusement. "I underestimated humans," she admitted. "You have a resilience I didn't anticipate." "Resilience and charm," Dorian said, nudging her shoulder. "But don't tell anyone. It ruins the mystique." The following day, with the outpost fully operational, Lyra suggested they venture beyond the immediate perimeter. Dorian protested dramatically at first, citing imaginary hazards like giant dust mites and meteor showers that might be feeling aggressive today, but eventually agreed. As they traversed the alien landscape, Lyra noticed her perspective had shifted. She observed the vibrant flora, the swirling skies, and the gentle glow of nocturnal creatures with a sense of awe, a curiosity she had long suppressed. The world no longer seemed threatening or monotonous. It was full of potential, of surprises, of things worth exploring. They paused near a crystalline ridge, the twin moons reflecting off the jagged formations. Dorian sat down, scanning the horizon. "You know," he said, "I think this place is beautiful and dangerous, and mostly me-friendly as long as I don't touch anything important." Lyra's ears twitched, a small smile forming. "You have a peculiar definition of beauty. And that's why I'm here," he said, grinning, "to redefine things." Silence settled over them, comfortable and unforced. For the first time, Lyra realized that the outpost no longer represented isolation. It had become a stage for shared adventures, a laboratory for courage, humor, and unexpected connection. The routines she had once held sacred were now interwoven with laughter, shared victories, and the unpredictable presence of another being. When a minor quirk in the energy shields caused a harmless flare, Dorian flailed comically, prompting Lyra to burst out laughing. "You never change," she said, still chuckling. "And you never stop being amazed," he replied, grinning. "Which is good, keeps me humble and alive." As they returned to the observation deck, Lyra reflected on the journey. She had learned to embrace unpredictability, to see value in mistakes, and to find joy in companionship. Her long ears twitched as she watched Dorian tinker with a small drone, still making noises that sounded suspiciously like musical improvisation. She realized that life, once rigid and solitary, had expanded into something richer, unpredictable, and profoundly alive. Later, as they watched the twin moons dip below the horizon, Dorian nudged her gently. "You know, I think we make a good team, maybe the best, certainly the only one with style." Lyra tilted her head, her ears brushing against the console. "Perhaps," she said softly, "perhaps we do." In that moment, she understood that her life had changed irrevocably, not because the universe had altered, but because she had. She had opened herself to trust, to laughter, to partnership. And in doing so, she discovered that even in the vast emptiness of space, connections could form, grow, and transform everything. The outpost hummed quietly, the stars glittering beyond reinforced observation windows. Lyra and Dorian, an unlikely pair of human and alien, stood together, sharing jokes, victories, and a bond that had been forged in chaos, humor, and courage. The adventure had ended, but the possibilities ahead seemed infinite. And for the first time in her life, Lyra felt not just alive, but part of something greater. Her long ears twitched with a contented energy as she glanced at Dorian. "We're ready for whatever comes next," she said. "Absolutely," he replied, grinning. "And if it involves chaos, I'm volunteering."